in terms of the breadth of the challenge here, and I think it's very interesting that you reference the challenges for vulnerable customers, but clearly, unless somebody makes a full-time job of this, even if you're not vulnerable, I think it's very difficult to navigate what are very complex systems, which you've rightly identified. It'd be helpful to understand to what extent, and you referenced at the beginning, the regulators have done some good things to improve the matter. So it'd be helpful to understand what more do you think they need to do to fix some of these challenges that you are outlining, and obviously there's many more besides.
So on energy, and I think probably worth saying, because you're all politicians, if I would say 2/3 of my mailbag, which I'm one of the few people who probably has one bigger than you, to be honest with you, 2/3 of my mailbag on energy complaints is very simply about the standing charge. The moral hazard that you have to pay £315 a year just to have the facility of having gas and electricity, that we have older people who don't use gas for 2/3 of the year and they're having to pay a daily charge for it, and that people who are lower users, if they reduce their usage, it doesn't make any difference because they're still paying the standard charge. That is by far and away the thing that drives people mad the most. And I always use the analogy, if I go to buy a book from a bookshop, they don't say, sorry, you have to be a member of a club and pay us each month in order to buy a book, because we have fixed costs. I don't have to pay my fixed costs are factored into the price of the book. Why do we have to have fixed costs factored into a daily charge and variable costs factored into a unit rate? The shift could be done, and I was very hopeful with Ofgem. We had long conversations that it was going to bring a dual price cap, a low standing charge higher unit rate and the normal standing charge and lower unit rate, which, and my view was that should be, people who are on the price cap should be automatically shifted to whichever one was beneficial for them based on their prior year's usage, with an opt-out basis if they chose not to. That was stopped, and then it was moved to this system of we're going to allow switchers tariffs and mandate switchers tariffs, which have a lower standing charge. Now, my big problem with that is that doesn't help anybody who's vulnerable, because they're the people who don't switch that the price cap was set up to protect in the first place. So switchers tariff don't help. And then we're going to trial switchers tariffs, and they'll be coming in spring. Haven't seen any yet.
And just to focus on the sort of different types of customers that experience these challenges. I mean, I recently had a constituent who's 85, excuse me, and out of excuse me, sorry,
oh dear, water.
Out of nowhere, landed a bill £575, and it was all to do with the being unable to make smart meter readings, and so they'd made an estimate. It was quite wild considering his energy use, and he had been writing to them only to discover that actually they don't have a postal address, and were not receiving any of the letters. And that's just one example of clearly a vulnerable customer. That's a disabled 85-year-old. Have you got reflections on the different experiences of different customer groups with some of the particular challenges that you're outlining?
So with a different hat on Money and Mental Health Policy Institute charity, which I chair, we have a mental health accessible audit. And one of the things that we do for mental health, so I have less experience on the physical health side, is the thing to understand is for some people being text is a nightmare. For other people, text is the only way they can communicate. So when you're talking essential service providers, which all of the firms involved in this industries are, we have to start putting how you communicate rules on. I mean, many modern people, they only want digital, and I'm a digital person myself, I would want that, but there are many older, vulnerable people with disabilities of mental and physical health who need different contact mechanisms. We have a host of problems over billing. Billing is incredibly complex, especially in the energy world. We have the issue that you can't be back billed for more than 12 months, and I think Ofgem has been cracking down on that, but I still regularly get people who get in touch with me who've had 2 years of back billing. And if you don't know you can't be back billed for over a year, then you don't know to say, actually, I'm not paying for more than a year because it was your fault. I mean, there are technical rules. If you behaved wrongly, it doesn't matter. But effectively, if they haven't billed you for 2 years and it's their fault, they can't bill you for the longer than 12 months, but people still do get billed. And so surely one would think in this modern digital world, something is systemically going wrong in the companies in the way that we do this. The one final point, just because I'll throw it in when I've got my money and mental health hat on. Let's just take a picture of a physically or disabled person or someone with a mental health problem that is a severe problem, including potentially going into NHS mental health crisis care. So you have named water, so I've got my water company, I've got my broadband company, you've also got your mobile company, you've got your bank, you've got your insurer. And let's imagine I'm in a crisis mental health state, I'm having a fundamental anxiety situation, I'm potentially going to be hospitalised. To go back, we got to the state, we've had people who come out of NHS mental health crisis care who on the day they get back have bailiffs at their door. So this is not a small issue. And on that point, I have to call up my water company and tell them, I'm sorry, I'm going through a mental health crisis at the moment. And then I have to call my energy company. And then I have to call my broadband provider, my mobile provider, my bank, and my insurer. And these are actually detrimental to my mental health. There is no tell them once system, there is no tell them once database, and there are data privacy issues with all of this that would need to be handled. It could only be done on a voluntary basis. And actually, you're talking 3 different regulators, no criticism of them, they have their remits on this. But we're not just, these issues do not live in isolation of people's finances, they are a subset of everything that people deal with. And we have a fundamentally intransigent system that puts the burden on the vulnerable individual at moments of vulnerability to declare their vulnerability. And it shouldn't be like that in a digital world. I mean, this is the one time where you're actually capable. We need to have a centralised system where you can volunteer to tell them once. And that tell them once should go to all essential service and public service providers, as long as you're happy with that, with data privacy, and it's a voluntary system, not compulsory. And we need to start working that way. And in fact, the fact that you have it done on a tripartite level here is almost a problem in the start.
The risk of only scratching the surface. I'll hand back to you, Chair.
Could I just come back to you on that last point, Martin, if I may? Do you think we should have one unified system for the 3 regulators on total customer indebtedness, so that each of the 3 regulators would then be able to regulate a system on a total debt? Because it makes clear in the report somewhere that if you might be able to pay your energy bill of £500, but if you do, you're then likely to get into debt with your other utilities.
I haven't looked at that. I've looked at it more on the contact basis, so I'm just going to go slightly slow on that. And I would just reiterate, and forgive me, Chair, even if you unified those 3, and I'm going to plead the 5th on them, not that you do that in this country, but anyway, on debt, because I haven't looked at it, you're still only scratching the surface. I mean, the worst type of debt in this country is council tax debt. That is the one that you should not mess with. They have ridiculous enforcement powers, and it's far too quickly, and we've got the government to change that coming in next April. They're going to be changing those rules to slow it down a little bit. But you have the whole system of debt, and we have an underfunded debt counselling service in this country that are not joined in and interlinked to everything that is going on. I mean, we've got representative of someone who does brilliant work on that and has it over there with Citizens Advice on my right here. And so I think even if that were to work, and I'd need to do my thinking, it's not unified enough for me, for the vulnerable individual at a point of crisis. And the funny thing is, the only time we do this well is when someone's died. Mm-hmm. And maybe we should perhaps do it better while people are alive.
Mm-hmm. No, I accept that. I accept that I did say in my opening remarks, just water and energy, the 2 of them have reached the total debt of 7.2 billion. So we're getting into some pretty big figures here. Anyway, let's leave that for the moment. And although Tris was very kindly going to do the next question, Sarah, you're now here. So Sarah Olney, please.
We're at the right time. Thank you, Chair. Panel, from the cases you encounter, what, in your experience, are the most prominent barriers that consumers in vulnerable circumstances face when they're engaging with water, energy and broadband services? And if I can ask Ali Bell first.
Yes. CCW, Consumer Council for Water, we go round and do what we call complaint assessments and debt assessments. So basically, we go into the water company and we sit in the building with the customer services team for 2 days, and we do a real deep dive into a randomly selected bunch of complaints. So we listen to the phone recordings, we read the emails, we look at the case files, and we discuss with the customer service team what went well. There's lots of examples that we find of good practice, and some examples of not so good practice. And so what we found from, wading through all of this in real detail is that customers don't always get offered the help that they need proactively. There's a certain amount of, utility companies, water companies, waiting to be asked by the customer for the help that they need. But we know that 39% of people who need financial help from their water company don't even know that that is a thing that they can ask for, so they're not asking for it because they didn't know it was there. We find that how this plays out is that they don't get the help that they need early enough in the whole process, and then obviously that means that then there's more problems. People who weren't in debt are getting into debt, people who were already in debt are getting into worse debt. We know obviously that people find it really, really difficult to talk about, especially financial vulnerability, with another person. There's loads of embarrassment, there's loads of shame, and people are really, really fearful that, if I bring this to the attention, if I proactively bring this to my water company's attention, these things are going to get worse for me. And honestly, not everyone knows that if you can't pay your water bill, you can't be cut off. So people are worried about the consequences, even though that's not a consequence. And we find that if people have mustered up the courage to tell their water company about their financial issues, even from what you were saying, even then within the water company, we then find that they then have to tell that story. Somebody will be passed on to another team and they have to start again and say that embarrassing, shameful story again. Or maybe they say, we'll call you back next week, and this is a different person, and then they have to tell that story all over again. So it is a massive issue, awareness, and also being able to tell that story.
Thank you. And I just wonder if I can ask you, what do you think the regulators can be doing to help to encourage the utilities to bring down those barriers for their vulnerable customers?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd echo Ali in terms of what she said around some of those barriers. I think the other thing that we're increasingly seeing is use of AI within chatbots for when people are trying to contact through the website and getting kind of stuck in this cycle. So they're trying to ask for help, and maybe online is the way they feel most comfortable doing that. But I'm sure we've all done it when we're sort of trying to contact customer service on a website, and you don't give quite the right answer, and you just end up in an endless cycle. And also we see this issue with our advisors as well. So we did some research recently on challenges that our debt advisors in particular face in representing our clients, and even our advisors can find it really difficult to get in contact with creditors, including energy companies, water companies, and telecoms companies as well, with them being really slow to act, not being able to access through different channels. I think it's really on regulators to make sure that they're really monitoring this very carefully, and setting clear
the use of AI, or more broadly
the way
that they are
because it's really essential that people are able to contact their essential services providers when they're having difficulty, whether that's kind of directly or through an advice provider like Citizens Advice. So we really need to make sure that the regulators are really on top of this, and kind of putting requirements in place where kind of data is showing that that's not being effective.
Thank you, Sarah.
That's fine, yeah, thank you.
Could we then please perhaps go to Rachel?
Yes, of course. So going back to what Ofwat and Ofgem aren't doing to help out vulnerable customers, what more do you think they could do in terms of awareness to make people aware of the financial support and social tariffs among potentially eligible consumers? Because as a Member of Parliament, I have people coming to my surgeries, and even I mean, that sounds very grandiose, doesn't it? Even I am not aware of where there is support from whom and at what levels.
May I take that one?
Yeah, that is for you, sorry.
Okay.
Mr. Lewis.
Funny, I was talking to Dom on one of my team who's behind me before, and we were talking about, he went onto a water company site as he was doing some research on the back of this. Do you know what your equivalised income is? Because I don't know what my equivalised income is, but that's what you're asked. If you have an equivalised income, was that the phrase, Dom? Yeah. Equivalised income. I suspect none of us in the room know what our equivalised income is.
What does it mean?
I still don't know. That's the phrase that was one of the water companies for whether you're entitled to a social tariff or not. If your equivalised income is below X amount. Now I know exactly. So and the point I'm making is, well, if none of us in this room know what that means, and I don't know what that means, then I think it's probably not a good way to communicate it to vulnerable people.
Is that because they don't want to establish what it means, because they don't want to offer up the potential help?
I tend to think it's because they're crap at communicating.
I tend to agree.
I tend to think this isn't conspiracy, it's just crap. But I also think...
Again, Mr. Lewis.
Pardon?
Come again, we like straight talkers here.
But I think that what the regulator could do is crack down on crapness, if you like, if I'm allowed to keep saying the word. And I don't see why. I mean, I've had this in so many different sectors. We've had it recently with councils that they weren't explaining when you're entitled to the SMI discount correctly, and different websites were doing it. And it was a third of councils all had it wrong on their websites. Now, there aren't as many water companies. So in terms of you could start by a communications audit of how these water companies are communicating the social tariffs. Far better if they all had the same social tariff. We could have centralised, really good communication. Then I could go on the telly, and lots of other people could, and tell the whole country exactly how it works without having to simply say, check. And then you check and it's equivalised income. Broadband, according to policy and practice, 3.8 million households are missing out on water social tariffs. That's just outrageous. Broadband, 7.5 million households, though some cases broadband social tariffs aren't as good as the competitive tariffs out there if you're prepared to switch and switch again. What I find interesting on this, and I'm not doing this as a rent-seeking thing, I made sure that we have social tariffs in Money Savings Experts broadband comparison. And we ask you if you're on certain benefits, and then we include it if you are, and we don't include it if you're not likely to be eligible. I believe we're the only comparison that does have social tariffs in, because of course social tariffs don't pay. They don't pay lead fees, so that you don't generate any money if somebody switches through that particular mechanism. I think that doesn't seem to be the way to communicate it for me. I would think it should be in every different comparison that goes on there. So I would be putting that one in there. And then on energy, well, I mean, the biggest problem in energy is we don't have a social tariff. We went for a backstop tariff. I call it the pants cap, not the price cap. We went for a backstop tariff that was meant to be so that the people who never switch will not be quite as hideously ripped off as they would be if under a no price cap situation. But now we've moved into a quasi-regulated tariff for 60% of the population. And actually what we should be doing in energy is we should be defining who are the legitimate victims of competition and who are the illegitimate victims of competition. If you forgive me, and I mean it in a complimentary way, if all of you stay on the price cap and you pay too much because of it, that's your own fault, because you're educated digital natives who are capable of doing that piece of work for yourself, and it is out there. This is if we want a competitive market. I'm agnostic. You could also regulate all prices. It's not a market championing bit. But alternatively, then we have your struggling 90-year-old with dementia who pays more to boil a kettle than I do, because that's how it works, because I, of course, am on a good tariff, as you would expect, and therefore is an illegitimate victim of competition. So even before we get into this, we have never defined who are legitimate and illegitimate victims. And if you're going to work on the method of you have a market-based solution, as I say, I'm agnostic, I'm not championing it, I'm just saying I work within the system that exists, then you have to have price differentials if you want competition, because price differentials are what incentivizes people to move from tariff to tariff. And, you know, grab a good tariff at the moment you can when a one-year fix is cheap. So who can do that? Who can't do that? Who should we protect? Who shouldn't we protect? And what we have is a halfway house between a market system and price regulation, and we have the worst of both worlds. So there are some really big systemic problems going on in all these sectors.
Could I ask Anne to answer the question, because I know you come from a slightly more sort of grassroots perspective in terms of the Citizens Advice Bureau.
Yeah, see, we've done quite a lot of work around social tariffs, and the annual report and Martin's absolutely right. Awareness of these tariffs is really low, and take up as well. I think a really big problem is like a lack of standardisation, as Martin said. It makes it really difficult for people to work out what they're entitled to and also to claim it as well. I think in water there was a really critical opportunity to sort of deal with the standardisation. A lot of organisations were calling for a single social tariff, and the Cunliffe Independent Water Commission also recommended this. The government decided not to move ahead with that at this stage. I think that was a really big missed opportunity. And then in broadband, frankly, there's just, it's a voluntary scheme. There's absolutely no incentive for telecoms companies, broadband companies to A, get these right, and B, promote them. They've done very little in terms of promoting these tariffs amongst their customers. There's also a slight issue with broadband social tariffs in that people worry about the speeds and whether those products will be appropriate to meet their needs. So what we're suggesting now that is in broadband, instead of a specific tariff, you could have a voucher for low-income consumers for them to use to offset the cost of a package which actually works for them. I think at the moment it's really difficult for people. I mean, in energy's take-up of the warm home discount is around 70%. In broadband, it's less than 9%, and we've had them for a number of years now. Citizens Advice was sort of been calling for them to be made mandatory for a long time, but I think at this point the voucher is probably the solution that we would go with for broadband.
Can I just echo on that? So absolutely with broadband the problem is the speed. A social tariff might be £20 a month for 75 meg, but if you're a churner and you're willing to switch, you can get £13 a month for 115 meg, lasting a year, and then you'll have to change tariff again. And again, we have criteria totally different with each firm. Usually it's linked to universal credit, but some only give job seekers free broadband for 6 months. So there's no consistency. Therefore, you don't have any competition between firms, and you might have to switch firm to do it. The voluntary scheme, as always would happen with self-regulation, leads to a huge variety and a lack of communication about it. And actually, I haven't heard the voucher idea before. I think it's a very clever one.
Happy to send it to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Enlightening.
Just on the back of Rachel's question, and I don't necessarily need all three of you to answer, but is there a case that either or any of the utilities could put more information on the bills, whether they be paper or electronic? Things like the social tariff availability, the SRA, just so that people are aware that if they're in trouble, these are the things they need to be looking out for.
I don't think it would work.
Okay.
Because people don't read their bills.
Right.
So with a different element on, if we go back to where I started about the 75% of people are paying more because of the transparency situation, there is a get out of jail free card for companies in that, which is if you are going to do a price hike above a price hike, or you're going to do non-notified price hikes, as Sky opts out and it doesn't work within the system with anyone else and has been allowed to basically totally bypass the transparency system, you can get people to leave with 30 days notification, 30 days after notification. Now, interestingly, it's 30 days after notification. So it's not 30 days after your bill goes up. So you've got this one quick window to leave. People don't leave en bulk because they don't read their letters from their providers. And so you would need, if you wanted it to be done properly, interventionist schemes, not on your bill. It needs to be a direct, manifest communication of a similar type to the way they do their marketing when they're trying to sell, when they actually want to communicate with you. And it needs to be properly thought through and put on the same basis. Bills are big, complicated things that people don't understand anyway. And the slight danger, and forgive me, I hope I'm not, I get why, the slight danger is, what happens is, and I've seen this in so many sectors, firms add it to the bottom of the bill and say, well, we put it on the bottom of the bill, that's what you wanted, and nobody's seeing it, but now you've just allowed them to tick the box that they've done it, but it doesn't work. So intervention it needs to be done on a much more proactive basis, basically the same way that they sell. This needs to be sold to customers in the same way they're trying to sell them other tariffs. And it needs to be done with a legitimizer from the regulator on the back, with proper communication. You are entitled to this. This is an Ofcom, Ofgem, off-what scheme, right, that you can go and look it up separately on the site that means you're entitled to a tariff that other people... It's got to be a whole different way of communicating to get it across.
Very helpful. Thank you, Martin. Chris wanted to come back on a previous question, I think.
Yeah, so very quickly, you've already highlighted the fact that the regulatory environment is woeful. If 4 in 10 are not accessing social tariffs now in water companies and 3 in 10 in broadband, surely it's time to potentially look at a different approach where the regulators do actually have some teeth. Is there some examples in Europe or other nations where they've got this right, where there's just better access for vulnerable customers? And what are they doing that we could be learning?
I'm hugely parochial and only do the UK, so I can't answer your question, I'm afraid. I don't know if you're better than me.
Yes, Ali.
Well, I'm also extremely parochial and I only do England and Wales. However, we see that more and more people are aware of the social tariffs in water in the last kind of 2-3 years, which is partly because obviously the bills are stinging more, and then there's a cost of living crisis, and also someone's doing a lot of work to raise awareness of this thing. We found in our Water Matters this year that 56% of people are aware that there is social tariffs out there to help them. We're not convinced that it is the economic regulators' job to kind of do marketing of social tariffs. We don't necessarily think that that's where your customers would think to look for that. Obviously, we agree totally that with everybody that we need a single social tariff. But Ofwat already does have, since 2024, a customer-focused licence condition which says water companies should provide support for customers who are struggling to pay and customers in debt. Now, we understand that Ofwat is going to use this customer-focused licence condition to look at the Tunbridge Wells incident at Christmas when tens of thousands of people had no water. What we would like to see is Ofwat being much more proactive and much more curious in using this to make the water companies do this in much more standard business as usual. This should be the default of what we're providing. So we think the licence condition is really good. It's written really well. It is pretty comprehensive. But I think the way it gets used is just when there's been an incident, we look retrospectively at what happened, and actually we think the regulator could use it as a thing to enforce this is the good practice that we want to see from you all the time. So there is something here, it's just not been used and not been used as much as it should, and not been used in the way that it perhaps could be to improve things for vulnerable customers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tris. Sarah Green, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask Anne a question, if I may, and it's specifically around rising consumer debt in the energy sector. I'm sure your advisors are inundated with helping, do you call them clients? What do you call them?
Clients, people, depends on the context.
Yeah,
people.
The general public. What more do you think Ofgem itself could or should be doing to help address that rising consumer debt?
So it's a bit of a tricky one, in that energy debt absolutely is a huge problem, rising far more quickly than it has in the past, and it's reached completely unmanageable levels as well. And we've seen a 70% increase in the number of households in energy debt since 2021.
How would you define energy debt? Sorry, is that just any?
So that's people who are in arrears on their energy bill. So they've fallen behind on it. But the problem that we've got now is that there's this massive backstock of debt which was built up during the energy crisis when prices rose really steeply.
Actually, yeah.
We've started to see those come down a little bit now, but we've got this sort of legacy of debt that people, or the people that we help, are really going to struggle to ever pay down, frankly. And then you've also got, even at these slightly lower levels, people are still not able to afford those debts, so they're still creeping up. So you've kind of got this dual problem. Ofgem's been sort of working on this energy debt write-off scheme, which we think is a really good idea, because although it would kind of be funded primarily through people's energy bills, frankly, that money is never going to be paid back because households simply can't afford to pay it. So you're sending good money after bad, chasing that debt, and what people need is a clean break. Unfortunately, that scheme's been delayed. It's stuck between sort of Ofgem and the government in terms of sign-off. We think that if that could be signed off as soon as possible, that would be a great step forward. But then we also need to look at, like, going forward, how can we kind of help people to get back on top of those bills and be able to afford their ongoing consumption, which is where we get into things like reforming the warm home discount, and also looking at what more targeted support might be needed as the effects of the crisis in Iran comes through on the price cap over the next 6 months or so. What I'd say is it's not it's not something just the regulator can fix. It is very much a societal problem. So Ofgem for sure has a part to play in this, but really kind of it's a problem that the government equally needs to grapple with, because Ofgem can't fix the sort of societal issue of people not being able to afford their essentials.
You have a perspective you wanted to share?
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything that was said there. I think this is one area Ofgem have been working very hard on and have some pretty decent solutions. And the whole point, the people who can't pay, trying to push them to pay and spending resources to push them to pay, actually they need to pay their bills now. It is more important than the legacy debt from the energy crisis that we got there, which is how the scheme works. There are small things that can be done. Moving house is a big reason that many people have energy debt, because they don't pay their final bills and it keeps languishing, and some of those people can pay the bills, and it seems to me that we don't have the technological solutions in place that just make that work, so that isn't going on to everybody else's bills when you move house and you choose not to pay. I do think the standing charge is an issue here, because again, when you're a low user, you can't cut your bill because of the standing charge. And I still think, although it has got better, we have problems with unfair direct debits. I get huge numbers of complaints from people who have their direct debit going up 70% when nothing has changed and they're in credit. And it amazes me that companies' systems are simply not good enough. And then I tell them to quote, I think it's section 17 of your gas and electricity licence conditions, that you need to have a fair direct debit, and they have to justify it to you, and then they come back going, oh, they've lowered it. And there are all those people out there they haven't lowered it for, who therefore have an interstitial cash flow crisis, even though they'll get the money back in the end, which can risk hurting the rest of their finances and knock them into water debt and knock them into other debt, because their direct debit has been set too high and they're 80 years old and they don't know that the company's just got its estimate wrong or its computer's got a glitch on the back of it. So I still think there are things that we could do on top of everything else out there. Make the industry work as it should would be the phrasing.
Really helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sarah. We now move on to Clive, please.
Right, thanks, Chair. We've explored quite a lot of the problems and maybe some potential solutions, but a nice simple question to finish with then, each of you. What is one thing the regulators could do to actually improve the outcomes, particularly for consumers who've got financially vulnerable circumstances?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. Thank you very much. I think a really quick win would be a multi-sector priority services register, as Martin was talking about earlier, kind of this idea that you have to kind of contact every single utility provider that you have when you've got additional need and you need help. If there's a sort of version of a tell it once, I think that would be, tell us once, that would be really incredibly helpful. And then also I think sorry, I'm going to sneakily ask for two. Another one would be, as we've kind of like talked about and Martin's talked about really eloquently, like these markets are just so complex. You can't underestimate the value of independent advice. Citizens Advice, I would say that, but our energy advice delivers £25 million worth of benefits to energy consumers each year. That's because we're the statutory advice provider. This provision doesn't currently exist within the telecom sector, and people are really missing out in an area where it's incredibly complex. People have problems and they need help. So we would also call for statutory advice and advocacy within the telecom sector as well.
Would that mean payment to you from the companies?
It wouldn't necessarily be citizens' advice. I mean, I think that we could do a good job of it for sure. But yeah, it's levy on the industry of about 2p per household per year. As I said, in energy, we deliver benefits of 25 million just through our advice, and we're a really strong voice for consumers in the room when decisions are made as well. So we more than pay for ourselves. I think it's less about which organisation it would be, and more about this is a really key gap within an essential market where you have it in water, it's fulfilled by CCW. We fulfil that role in energy and post. You've got transport focus. So across a wide range of essential markets, you've got these provisions, but in the telecoms market, it's like completely absent at the moment, which is a really big gap.
Right.
Well, I've mentioned cutting the standing charge, and I've mentioned banning mid-contract price hikes above inflation, which I think is just such an easy win, and a universal social tariff, so I won't mention any of those again. Yes, sorry. I think I'm going to give a slightly different example, so it's not something I've said before, which I think is endemic. I talk, Most consumers I deal with aren't vulnerable. And I talk, when you come to the end of your contract on your broadband or mobile bill or digital television or roadside recovery or whatever it is, you know, if you want to stay where you are, haggle. Over 80% of people who haggle on breakdown cover succeed. Not quite as high, 60 to 70% of people on broadband and mobile deals at the end of their contract. When you've got a mental health condition, you're vulnerable, you're not haggling. So you're just lost. And there's an unequal market there's an information inequality going on out there. And ultimately, the bizarre thing when I listen to my wonderful peers who are sitting alongside me, they're dealing with vulnerable people who are struggling to access information, whereas people like me, we get all the best deals.
How do you enforce that?
Well, what you have to do is you have to say, you know, it's amazing. So what we've done is we put these social tariffs, not in energy, we put these social tariffs in to try and break that inequality, but then we still rely on people to have to claim them. And the people who can claim them are the people who aren't entitled to them, because that's the breakdown. So you have to work it an entirely different way. They need to be given automatically. We need databases that show people to go on. We're saying to the vulnerable people, you know, it's the same as we had with the bloody winter fuel payment. You know, pension credit is the most underclaimed benefit in the country. Why on earth was it linked to the most underclaimed benefit? 700,000 of the poorest pensioners in the country don't get pension credit, and we link this crucial payment to them. We need to stop relying on the vulnerable individuals to act like they're, you know, highly fluent middle-class churners like me.
We get the intention. So you've got a social tariff.
Yeah.
How does the company know who it should be applied to?
Well, if you had the centralised database of vulnerability that came in the first place, and they were tasked for doing the work and outreach in one centralised area to cut government and regulatory business down, they could be going and they could be putting people on these tariffs. I don't believe anybody is going to object to being put on a social tariff that caps your bill without asking for it.
I just want to know how the information is given if the customer doesn't voluntarily say.
We could start by joining government up, because government has all that information available to it right now. It has people's incomes, it has everything that's going on. There are hundreds of different ways. If you forgive me, allow me to go and talk to my team, and we'll come up with a mechanism that can suggest it better rather than policy on the fly.
Yeah, okay, that would be really helpful.
Yeah.
Yes, we have seen, when we do our debt assessments, we have seen some examples of water companies proactively putting people on payment schemes and tariffs that are better for them without waiting to be asked. So we think that is happening and it seems to be really working. And we've also seen some water companies looking at credit reference agency data so that before somebody goes into debt, they can contact them and help them. So there is some really good examples of best practice out there, but I agree it doesn't happen as standard and it doesn't happen as one thing. And if we want our wish list from CCW, obviously we also have been calling for a single social tariff since 2021, so that's not my ask, but Martin was saying how the practicalities of kind of how it doesn't work. We totally agree with all of that, and we also think that it kind of leaves social policy being set by, you know, the board of the water company, and we don't think that's necessarily right, and we definitely don't think it's working. So we wouldn't say it was for the regulator to do that either. We want every water company to have a dedicated, specially trained, expert, kind of extra care team or whatever you want to call them. We don't think that's necessarily for the regulator. We think that would mean that customers would be treated according to their needs. The people in the most need would get the most help and the most kind of specialised, dedicated expert help from people that understood how all your vulnerabilities kind of intersect. And we actually think that that would be better for water companies as well as for customers, because we think if you could solve that kind of first go, that would probably cut down on your repeat contact. So we think that probably should be done by water companies. But the thing we would ask for the regulator is for them to use the customer focused licence condition much more proactively and with much more curiosity, and to make things happen as your baseline, as your standard. This is the default. All the companies are doing this for customers who are vulnerable, and not just wait till there's been a massive incident that's, you know, caused loads of attention and then use it to look at that.
I think we'll manage with one suggestion to say. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Clive. If nobody else has got any questions, I've got one or two questions just to finish up on. Should PSRs be seen as a gateway to reaching consumers with vulnerabilities?
Yeah, absolutely. Priority service registers are a really useful way of essential services providers to know who's likely to need more help in particular circumstances. And it can be a useful way to identify who needs more support more broadly. But what we know is like awareness of these schemes is currently really low. And you have to go through the rigmarole of kind of signing up to each one. So I'd like to see kind of cooperation across the regulators to see if there's a way that kind of that data can be shared in a safe way and with people's consent. And our research also showed broad support amongst the population for a single priority service register as well. It just feels like quite a simple way to kind of identify, you know, which people are more likely to need support. And also, just kind of might lead to more ways to kind of identify those people who might be eligible for sociable tariffs, but agree with Martin that there's kind of government has all of the data that you need. There's examples of data sharing in energy market, for example, so just much more consistency and just making it easier for people to get the support that they need.
Yes, Sally.
Yeah, on PSRs in water, what we see a lot is a lot of kind of confusion, like you're saying, people kind of assuming that it is a gateway, and we think this is because a lack of kind of good, clear information. 2 in 5 people on PSRs have been contacted by their water company since they joined it, only 2 in 5. 59% of PSR customers, like you were saying, think that it means that if there's an outage and there's no water, they will get their water back first, and that isn't automatically true. So people are thinking, well, why didn't I get my water? That's not what being on the PSR means. Just over 1 in 5 think that it also means that they will get, as you were saying, kind of automatically somehow put on a beneficial tariff or a scheme that helps them, and obviously that isn't necessarily the same thing. And in the Tunbridge Wells incident at Christmas, we went back and did some research after that incident, and we found that half the people who were on the PSR didn't receive the help that they expected during that whole incident. And I think what we feel like is happening is that companies are building a list and they're not really building those relationships. It's like we often hear things like the company will say, well, we gave out bottled water. We went round in a van and we delivered bottled water to everybody who was on the PSR. And we would say, well, why did you do that? Because if you're like 25 and you're 6'2" man who's deaf, you might well be on the PSR so that you can be communicated with in the way that is useful to you. You don't necessarily need bottles of water brought round to your house, ahead of somebody else. And then what we also found in that incident was that people who had huge mobility issues had loads of massive bottles of water dumped at the end of their front path, which they couldn't bring into the house, they couldn't take it into the kitchen, they couldn't get it up on the side. So I think a PSR needs to be more than a list. It needs to be something that really understands, yes, this person is on this list, what do they actually need and what do they want? Because I think there's a real assumption that, oh, that's what you want and that's what you need. So they need to be a real living thing that really understands people's needs instead of being, oh yes, I've got to listen, ticked it off and I've done the thing.
I think the one thing I would say about that is, and it echoes what you said earlier, the problem is a board of a company's job is to make money for their shareholders in most cases. And what we have to do is they get too much discretion in how they internally operate what should be social policy on behalf of the nation. And actually that should be something that's mandated either by government or through regulators, and there should be specific ways and operating procedures to go there. But we don't. We effectively subcontract this out to the private sector. And the private sector, these companies are not there to say, and their job is, they're sitting at the board tables and someone is regretfully having to tell them that we need to meet these requirements and they're ducking. But they're really, we all know, and I work as part of a PLC, we know that what the people at the top are doing is they're going, are we meeting our targets at the moment? And those targets are about financial targets, and that's the problem, ultimately. And so therefore what you need is, there are times you need more proactive and prescriptive regulation about how it should operate, and there are times you need policy-based regulation. When it comes to dealing with vulnerable customers where there's no competitive issues, and there aren't competitive issues in this, then actually you need to have more prescription about what should and shouldn't be done, and it's a bit flaccid at the moment.
I have a final question, and I love, Martin, your conversation with Clive about blue skies thinking as to how you can have a central source of vulnerable customers' information so that each of the three utility companies don't have to invent the wheel every time. That central register of that information can only work, given your fantastic examples at the beginning of the different benefits and definitions of vulnerability. So isn't the first stage to agree what the definitions are, what benefits enable you to qualify for these things and what don't? Once you've got that, you can have the central register, and then you can start to come up with perhaps even a prompt to customers as to whether they are eligible for a PSR or a social tariff or not, rather than having to claim from the individual utility and all the problems that we've discussed today.
I think you could work it either way round. If you had a central register, even if it was fitting into differential policies, if the central register has the right data, then it can be, in an AI world, it isn't that difficult to match people to their policies that's going on. The unified, it's a long time. I mean, we need to be realistic to have a unified essential services register, and I would go way beyond just the three sectors you're talking. I think it needs to be far wider. It is a massive national project. And I'll be honest, I actually looked at whether I could do something as a charity. And then once I started to look into it, I went, this has to come from government. It's too big, and the data security issues are too big for private individuals to do it. We have, Money and Mental Health Policy Institute has done a paper on it and how you would do it. And I can get that submitted to you if that would be helpful.
Would. Thank you very much indeed. So I'll give the last word to Rupert Lowe.
Well, yes, thank you very much. I found it very interesting what you're saying. I just got a question really, because this isn't my area of expertise, but I'm inclined to agree with you that we've got the worst of all worlds here. We've got private monopolies reporting to, as you say, boards of shareholders. So do you know, before, and this doesn't apply obviously to broadband, but before we got water and energy, how did the water corporations and the sort of, if you like, power utilities, how did they used to deal with it when they were in public ownership? Did they pass the best rates on to everybody, or did they have differential charging? Because I suspect a lot of this may have developed over time, and I've been quite interested to look at the fact it appears to me that Ofwat, CCW appear to be providing the role of ombudsman, as far as I can see from figure 2 here. So I was quite, do any of you know how it was dealt with? Because if we had a situation where, rather than all this business of talking about whether they've disclosed it, whether they've made it easier to obtain, and I agree with you, a lot of the people we're trying to help aren't going to have the mental capacity or indeed the intellect to get the best rates. As you say, you're a chopper and a changer and a bobber and a weaver, and you can, but they may not be able to. So do you know, how did they deal with it when they were in public ownership?
Being too young, I'm afraid. I'm so sorry.
Well, you probably are, yes. Yes.
I
so nobody knows. Does anyone else
before
know?
My time.
How did they deal with it? Did they have a social responsibility to?
I'm not sure. I think it would have been on rateable value to start with. I think these tariffs are newer, and that metering and things have come in after, and it would have just been on rateable value of your property. Is my assumption.
I think it's the big, certainly on energy, the proportion of your income that energy takes has grown substantially over the years, and especially in the previous few years. So I think the amount of attention that it faces, even when I started, was back in 2000, once it was privatised, energy bills were just, they were one of those pieces of housekeeping that I had to encourage people to do, because you're going to be saving 70, 80 quid, and, whereas now it's, unfortunately the savings aren't huge now because of the market conditions. They're just such a huge proportion of your bid. The typical use figure, which is it's a bit of a myth, the typical use figure, but is £1,800 or dropping on £1,600 the new figure. It's now a huge proportion if you contrast that to the state pension of what people have. So I don't know the answer to your question. I best be honest about that, but I think it's just become all more important.
I mean, I'm of adequate intelligence, and I run lots of businesses, and we find it very difficult, even in a business environment, to be able to keep up with particularly the energy prices. And I think, you've now got this sort of underworld of people who leapt up, who sort of disintermediate between the energy companies and the end user. and there's almost been a new market created for
Rupert,
people like
come
that.
on,
It's
bring
quite interesting. It's quite
question.
interesting. It's an interesting debate, Jeff.
Yeah, okay. Anna has a quick question.
Yes, if I may, and particularly to Martin in the area of mobile and broadband. I just wondered if you had a view, it comes from personal experience of my 85-year-old parents, but I wouldn't call them vulnerable, of automatic renewals, huge exit fee for moving house, even though the provider couldn't provide the new house, a bill of $1,600 just dropped out of nowhere, and also staying on and being charged by a mobile provider for paying for a handset which was long past spending and not shifting onto a sort of pay-as-you-go fee. Huge number of things that I think make ripping people off. What would you say, Martin, to that?
Well, I literally have a soapbox on my show, and I have got on my soapbox on all those issues. The fact that, and it tends to be resellers rather than main networks, that you can sign somebody up to a £35 a month tariff, of which effectively £30 is paying for the handset that you got. After 2 years, you've paid off the handset, but they don't drop it. You still pay £35. So effectively, it's a confusion tariff. It's is outrageous. The whole way that if you move broadband that you don't have a right to cancel your contract, and it's pretty easy. You know, you have a conveyancing solicitor when you move house, and those conveyancing solicitors are able to sign documents that says you're entitled to your lifetime ISA or your Help to Buy ISA money. And within that, if you really, broadband companies are so scared that someone might try and jemmy the system, we could just add it something that you get a small note from your conveyancing solicitor so you could get out of contract. All of those are fundamentally unfair. But I go back to the fact that we now have a system where the regulator has regulated that companies can increase prices whenever they want mid-contract as long as they tell you about it in advance. And it's a bit like saying, if I came up to you in the street, it's fine if I punch you in the face as long as I told you about it beforehand.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the right way. Now, I'm just take my 1 second on that. I'm getting some flack because I'm saying they should be allowed to increase rates by inflation mid-contract. Of course I don't want that. Of course I think a contract should be a contract on the price. But I'm hearing arguments about investment, and I'm also saying, well, that could slightly jemmy the marketplace because they would have to provision too high in the first place in case costs went up. So the rule in my eyes is there should be no real increase during contracts. So you set it at CPI inflation. We all know what that means, and that would work. Yeah, I mean, companies get away with too much in a way that's anti-consumer, and those are things I would hope the regulator would look at. But they've been around a long time and not been looked at yet.
Joint campaign, Anna.
Thank you.
I just do 2 seconds
Very
on the
briefly,
telecom.
Anna,
Totally agree with all of that. I mean, telecoms pricing, what our research shows is that the best deals are hidden, so they're never advertised. You have to call up and haggle and say that you're going to leave, and then you get them. And then when you take a contract, the ones which are there, our research shows that no one understands. The ones on the website, they're too complicated. And then you take a deal and then the price goes up mid-contract anyway. So telecoms pricing is a
tiny disagreement, but not a proper one. They're not hidden, and this isn't a plug. They're on Money Saving Expert. And the reason they're on Money Saving Expert is because our users are switchers. So those people where there's an elasticity of demand get cheaper prices, and they give all the comparison sites have the cheapest deals, and the cheapest deals are not done by cheaper tariffs, they're done by £150 Amazon voucher. Because if you do cheaper tariffs, you have to, effectively, the bigger companies have to offer those to existing customers on their own websites. So you have the list price on your website, and then you come to a site like mine, and I would say we are the cheapest, but there we go. You come to a site like mine, and we have better deals, but they're done via marketing incentives on top, rather than reducing tariff prices, so you'd have to offer to existing customers. That's the way the marketplace works. So it is about those in the know get a lot cheaper. And that's okay, again, if we go to legitimate and illegitimate victims. But the problem is when we're within this purview of vulnerable customers, in my view, are illegitimate victims. And that's the problem.
Fantastic. Can I thank all three of you very much? This has been a tremendously informative session. Really, really grateful to all three of you for spending time with us today. That quote from Martin, companies get away with too much, and I'm going to ask the regulators in a minute about that. Thank you all very much. An uncorrected version of our transcript will be available in the next few days. We will, I think, produce a report on this with recommendations. We hope you'll look at those. If you disagree with them, come back to us. And we hope the government will take them on board. So, again, many thanks for coming today.